A young woman is found unconscious in front of a luxurious mansion on Christmas Eve. But when a millionaire helps her, a shocking secret is revealed. Snow fell softly on Fifth Avenue that Christmas Eve, hidden behind an old oak tree. Amelia clutched a worn notebook to her chest, her slender fingers trembling inside her threadbare gloves. Her emerald green eyes, sharp as a cat's, never left the imposing Hamilton Manor. 7:15 p.m. Office lights on, she scribbled in her delicate handwriting. Like every night. Her fingers instinctively touched the silver locket hidden beneath her coat, far too thin for the harsh winter. The mansion stood tall and imposing, occupying almost the entire block. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, with its high windows and ornate balconies, were now decorated with subtle Christmas lights. Snow accumulated on the eaves, creating patterns resembling icy lace. It was a world away from St. Michael's orphanage, with its peeling walls and perpetually closed windows. Flashback. "You can't keep that," Sister Margaret said 5 years earlier, trying to snatch the locket from Amelia's neck. "Personal items are not allowed." "My mother gave it to me," Amelia cried, clinging to the only connection she had to her past. "Your mother? You were found in a basket, child. No name, no history." But Amelia knew there was more. The initials engraved on the locket, H, had to mean something. End of flashback. Her eyes returned to the mansion. From her hiding place, she could see Mr. Hamilton in his second-floor office. Every day at 7:15 p.m., he sat in his leather armchair, a glass of amber liquid in hand, gazing at a framed photograph Amelia couldn't quite make out. Movement in the kitchen, she noted. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davis, as the other staff called her, was preparing dinner, alone, as always. A huge mansion for just 2 people. The biting wind made Amelia shiver. Her plan was simple. Observe, take notes, find a pattern. 6 days in a row now at the same time. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast at the homeless shelter where she'd slept the night before. Another note, 7:45 p.m. He never dines with the staff. The locket felt heavy on her neck, as if holding all the secrets she sought. The faded photograph inside showed a smiling woman in front of this very mansion. On the back, only a date and the initials she knew by heart. The snow was falling harder now. Amelia struggled to focus, her legs numb with cold. The chill penetrated her thin coat, a gift from a kind woman at the previous shelter. Her fingers could barely hold the pencil. 8 p.m. dining room lights. The words blurred in her vision. Flashback. "You look just like someone," an elderly staff member at the orphanage had said years ago. "Those eyes. I've seen them somewhere before." But before Amelia could ask more, the woman was gone. The next day, she didn't return to work. End of flashback. The world began to spin. Amelia tried to steady herself against the tree, but her legs gave way. The notebook slipped from her grasp, pages of meticulous notes scattering in the snow. Her last sight was of Hamilton Manor, its lights now blurred like distant stars. "I need to know," she murmured before her eyes closed. The locket shimmered faintly under the streetlights, the initials E, Christ glinting on the falling snow, which continued to blanket the small, fallen figure like a frigid shroud. Inside the mansion, Edward Hamilton remained in his office, unaware that the answer to years of solitude lay unconscious across the street, carrying a secret that would change their lives forever. The snow continued to fall, silent, guarding secrets soon to be revealed. Edward Hamilton watched the snow fall through his office window, his glass of whiskey untouched. At 48, the streaks of grey at his temples contrasted with his still youthful face, etched with lines of worry. His blue eyes, once vibrant, now held a persistent melancholy. Turning, his gaze settled on the photograph above the fireplace. Elizabeth, his wife, smiled radiantly on their wedding day. 5 years had passed since the accident, but the pain remained fresh, as if it were yesterday. "Mr. Hamilton," Mrs. Davis's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Dinner is served." Mrs. Davis, the 65-year-old housekeeper, had been with the Hamilton family for 3 decades. Her grey hair was always impeccably arranged in a bun, and her brown eyes held a mixture of concern and maternal affection. "Thank you, Mrs. Davis, but I'm not hungry," Edward replied, his voice hoarse from disuse. Mrs. Davis sighed, a familiar gesture after years of caring for this man who seemed to have lost his zest for life. "Sir, you need to eat, Mrs. Elizabeth wouldn't want to see you like this." The mention of Elizabeth's name made Edward visibly flinch. He finally set his glass down and followed Mrs. Davis to the dining room. Hamilton Manor was a silent testament to a life that no longer existed. Long hallways adorned with photographs of happier times, Edward and Elizabeth honeymooning in Paris, the couple smiling at a picnic, Elizabeth in her rose garden. Each image was a stab in Edward's heart. In the dining room, the large oak table was set for one. Crystal and silverware gleamed under the chandelier, a stark contrast to the loneliness of the single-place setting. "Mrs. Davis," Edward broke the silence as he sat down. "You needn't worry so much, I'm fine." The housekeeper looked at him skeptically. "With all due respect, sir, you're not. For 5 years you've barely left this house, refused invitations, left the business in the hands of managers. This isn't living, it's merely existing." Edward sighed, pushing the food around his plate. "What else is there, Mrs. Davis? Elizabeth was my life. And your sister, Emily. It's been 10 years since—" "Don't mention Emily," Edward interrupted, his voice suddenly harsh. The mysterious disappearance of his younger sister was another ghost that haunted him. "Mrs. Davis nodded resignedly. She knew the secrets and sorrows of the Hamilton family well. She had been there when Emily vanished without a trace, comforted Elizabeth during nights of weeping, and now cared for Edward in his self-imposed seclusion. After dinner, Edward returned to his office, his sanctuary. The walls were lined with books, many of them gifts from Elizabeth. On his desk, a pile of unopened mail accumulated. The company he'd inherited from his father, once his passion, was now a distant burden. Picking up Elizabeth's framed photograph, Edward allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. "I miss you so much, my love," he whispered, his fingers tracing the outline of her face in the picture. A sudden cry from Mrs. Davis shattered the night's silence. "Mr. Hamilton, quickly!" Alarmed, Edward rushed to the mansion's entrance. Mrs. Davis stood at the door, staring in horror at something on the sidewalk. Following her gaze, Edward saw a small figure lying in the snow. Without hesitation, he ran outside, the biting cold stinging his face. As he got closer, he saw it was a young woman, no older than 16 or 17, unconscious and trembling violently. "My God," he murmured, removing his coat and wrapping it around her. As he lifted her into his arms, he noticed a notebook lying beside her, pages scattered in the snow. Mrs. Davis quickly gathered them. Carrying the young woman inside, Edward felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of urgency, of purpose. "Mrs. Davis, call Dr. Peterson immediately." As he laid the young woman on the living room sofa, Edward noticed something glinting around her neck, a silver locket. Curious, he opened it. The shock made him stagger. Inside the locket was a photograph he knew well, his sister Emily, smiling in front of Hamilton Manor. On the back, the initials E.H. and a date he would never forget, the day Emily disappeared. "Impossible," he whispered, looking at the young woman's pale face. Now that he observed her closely, he couldn't deny the resemblance. The same green eyes as Emily, the same face shape. Mrs. Davis hurried back. "The doctor is on his way, sir. Who is she?" Edward, still stunned, could only murmur, "I don't know, Mrs. Davis, but I think we just found the key to a 10-year-old mystery." As they waited for the doctor, Edward held the young woman's icy hand, feeling, for the first time in years, that fate might have other plans for him. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside Hamilton Manor, a spark of hope began to flicker. Dr. Peterson snapped his medical bag shut. "She'll be fine, Mr. Hamilton. Mild hypothermia and malnourishment, but nothing that good care won't fix." Edward nodded, his gaze fixed on the sleeping girl in the guest room. Amelia, as they'd learned from a crumpled ID in her pocket, was breathing steadily now, her pale face contrasting with the white sheets. "Thank you, Doctor," Edward murmured, escorting him to the door. Alone again, He returned to the guest room, settling into the armchair beside the bed. Amelia's locket rested on the nightstand, gleaming softly under the lamplight. Emily's image inside seemed to stare back at him, accusingly. Mrs. Davis entered quietly, carrying a tray with tea. "Sir, I found this among her belongings," she said, holding out the worn notebook they'd retrieved from the snow. Edward hesitated before taking it. "Shouldn't we—" "It's private." "With all due respect, sir, we need to know who she is and why she was watching us." Reluctantly, Edward opened the notebook. His eyebrows rose in surprise as he saw pages and pages of meticulous notes about Hamilton Manor. Times, routines, detailed descriptions of every window, every entrance. "My God," he whispered. "It seems she was spying on us." Mrs. Davis leaned closer, looking over Edward's shoulder. Her eyes widened as she saw a precise sketch of the mansion's facade. "This is unsettling, sir." Edward abruptly closed the notebook, his mind in turmoil. On one hand, the evidence pointed to something sinister. On the other, he couldn't ignore the girl's resemblance to Emily, nor the locket she carried. "What are we going to do, sir?" Mrs. Davis asked, her voice betraying her concern. Before Edward could answer, a murmur came from the bed. Amelia stirred, her green eyes fluttering open, disoriented. Where am I?" Her voice was weak, frightened. Edward approached cautiously. "You're safe. I'm Edward Hamilton. You fainted in front of my house." Amelia's eyes widened in recognition, then in panic. She tried to sit up, but Edward gently restrained her. "Easy, no one's going to hurt you, but we need to talk." Amelia looked around frantically, her eyes landing on the notebook in Edward's hands. "My notebook," she murmured. "Please." Edward hesitated, then handed it to her. "Amelia, why were you watching us?" The girl clutched the notebook to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. I was looking for my mother," she whispered. Mrs. Davis, who had been watching the scene unfold, stepped closer. Her eyes scrutinized Amelia's face intently. "Sir," she said softly, "look at her eyes, the shape of her face. Don't you see the resemblance?" Edward nodded slowly. The resemblance to Emily was undeniable. "Amelia," he said gently, "where did you get that locket?" The girl instinctively touched her neck, realizing the locket wasn't there. Her eyes filled with panic. "My locket, where is it?" "It's here." Edward retrieved it from the nightstand. "It's very similar to one my sister had." Amelia reached out a trembling hand, taking the locket. "It was the only thing my mother left me when she abandoned me." Silence hung heavy in the room. Edward and Mrs. Davis exchanged meaningful glances. "Amelia," Mrs. Davis said softly, "how long have you been on your own?" The girl lowered her eyes. "Since I ran away from the orphanage 6 months ago, I found out my mother might be here in this house." Edward felt his heart clench. His initial suspicion was giving way to a growing compassion. "Why didn't you come to us directly?" Amelia bit her lip. "I was afraid. At the orphanage, they said I was abandoned. What if my mother didn't want me?" Mrs. Davis couldn't hold back her tears. Even Edward, normally reserved, felt a lump forming in his throat. "Well," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think we have a lot to talk about, but first, you need to eat." An hour later, they were all seated at the dining table. The tension was palpable. Amelia, now clean and dressed in borrowed clothes, nervously picked at her full plate. Edward cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Amelia, I know this is all strange, but I promise we'll find out the truth about your mother." The girl nodded timidly. Did you know my mother?" Edward exchanged a look with Mrs. Davis before answering. "If our suspicions are correct, your mother was my sister, Emily." Amelia's eyes widened. "So, you would be my uncle," Edward finished, the word sounding strange on his lips, "but we still have a lot to figure out." Mrs. Davis, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. "How about we start with a happy story? Amelia, would you like to hear about when your mother was a child?" The girl's face lit up and she nodded enthusiastically. As Mrs. Davis recounted stories of Emily's childhood, Edward watched Amelia. Every smile, every expression was an echo of his lost sister. His initial distrust was dissipating, replaced by a mixture of hope and fear. "And your mother," Mrs. Davis continued, "loved to perform magic tricks. One time she made all the silverware on the dining table disappear." Amelia laughed, a sound that made Edward's heart leap. How long had it been since the mansion had heard such a sound? When dinner was over, Edward found himself in a dilemma. What to do now? Legally, he should inform the authorities. But something inside him rebelled against the idea of sending Amelia away. "Amelia," he said finally, "would you like to stay with us for a while? At least until we find out more about your mother?" The girl's face lit up with hope. "Could I really?" Edward nodded, feeling for the first time in years that he was doing the right thing. "Yes, you can. And I promise we'll do everything we can to discover the truth about your mother." That night, as Amelia slept in the guest room, Edward stayed awake, looking at old photographs of Emily. The mansion, which for so long had been a mausoleum of painful memories, seemed to be coming alive again. And for the first time since losing Elizabeth, Edward Hamilton felt a spark of hope for the future. The sun had barely risen when Amelia opened her eyes. For a moment, she was disoriented by the luxury of the guest room, so different from the cold dormitories of the orphanage. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, her bare feet making little sound on the soft carpet. Heart pounding. Amelia opened the bedroom door and peeked into the hallway. Silence. Summoning her courage, she began her secret exploration of Hamilton Manor. The hallway was lined with paintings and photographs. Amelia paused before a particularly large portrait. A young, smiling woman, with the same green eyes she saw in the mirror every day. "Mother," she whispered, touching the glass with her fingertips. Continuing her journey, Amelia came to a half-open door. Peeking inside, she saw it was an office. Bookshelves overflowing with volumes lined the walls, and a large wooden desk dominated the center of the room. Papers and files were scattered across the desk. Curious, Amelia slipped inside. Her eyes scanned the book titles: business, finance, law. But what caught her attention was a small cow-carved wooden box on the desk. Carefully, she opened it. Inside were more photographs. Amelia picked one up, and her heart nearly stopped. It was the same woman from the portrait in the hallway, but younger, embracing a man who looked remarkably like Edward. On the back of the photo, an inscription: "Emily and Edward, summer 1995. "What are you doing here?" Mrs. Davis's voice made Amelia jump, dropping the photo. I'm sorry," Amelia stammered, her face burning with shame. "I just wanted—" Mrs. Davis sighed, approaching her. Her eyes fell on the dropped photograph, and a shadow of sadness crossed her face. "I see you found your mother's pictures." Amelia's eyes widened. "So, it's true. That woman is my mother." Mrs. Davis picked up the photo, gazing at it fondly. "Yes, dear. This is Emily, Mr. Hamilton's sister." She hesitated for a moment, then continued, "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." They left the office and went to a small room at the end of the hallway. Mrs. Davis opened an old chest and retrieved a dusty photo album. This was Emily's personal album, Mrs. Davis explained, sitting on the bed and inviting Amelia to join her. She kept it hidden here. As they flipped through the album, Mrs. Davis told stories about Emily, her passion for photography, her adventurous spirit, her infectious laugh. Amelia drank in every word, her eyes shining as she saw her mother young and happy. "She was amazing," Amelia whispered, tracing the outline of Emily's face in one of the photos. Mrs. Davis nodded, then frowned, noticing something. "Amelia, dear, where's your locket?" The girl instinctively brought her hand to her neck, realizing she had left the locket hidden under her pillow. I put it away. It's the only thing I have of my mother's. I'm afraid of losing it." Mrs. Davis looked at her sympathetically. "I understand, dear. But you know, that locket might be the key to finding out more about what happened to Emily." Before Amelia could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Edward appeared at the door, surprised to see them there. "Good morning," he said hesitantly. His eyes fell on the open photo album, and a shadow crossed his face. "I see you found Emily's album." Amelia stood up, nervous. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hamilton, I shouldn't be here." Edward raised a hand, stopping her. "It's all right, Amelia. You have a right to know about your mother." He approached, looking at the photos over the girl's shoulder. His gaze alternated between the images of Emily and Amelia's face. "Why, it's remarkable," he murmured. "You're the spitting image of her at your age." Amelia blushed, a mixture of pride and sadness in her chest. Can you tell me more about her?" Edward hesitated, an old pain reflected in his eyes. Emily was special, bright, full of life, but also stubborn and impulsive at times. He picked up a photo of a teenage Emily, smiling with a photography trophy. "She disappeared 10 years ago. We never knew what happened." A heavy silence fell over the room. Amelia felt tears forming in her eyes. "I was born 11 years ago," she said softly. "That means that she must have disappeared shortly after your birth," Mrs. Davis finished gently. Edward nodded, his mind clearly working. "Amelia, I know this is difficult, but we need to know more. The orphanage where you were, did they have any information about your parents?" Amelia shook her head. "And they only said I was abandoned in a basket on their doorstep, with the locket and a note asking them to take care of me." Mrs. Davis exchanged a significant look with Edward. "Sir, I think we should investigate this further. Perhaps Emily didn't abandon Amelia of her own free will." Edward ran a hand through his hair, clearly disturbed. "You think something might have happened to her, but why would anyone—" "The company," Mrs. Davis interrupted. "Remember the trouble we were having back then, the threats, the suspicious dealings." Amelia looked from one to the other, confused and frightened. "What are you talking about? Did someone hurt my mother?" Edward knelt before her, taking her hands. "We don't know, Amelia, but I promise we'll find out. You would help us greatly if you could show us the locket. There might be a clue in it that we haven't seen before." Amelia hesitated, then nodded. "It's in my room. I'll get it." When she left, Edward turned to Mrs. Davis. "What do you think?" The housekeeper sighed. "I think we have a long road ahead of us, sir. But look at that girl. She deserves to know the truth about her mother, and maybe it's time we face the ghosts of the past." Edward nodded, his gaze returning to Emily's photographs. For the first time in years, he felt a renewed sense of determination. Whatever had happened to his sister, he would find out. For Emily, for Amelia, and finally, for himself. Amelia returned to the room, the silver locket gleaming in her trembling hands. Edward and Mrs. Davis watched intently as she handed it over. Edward held the locket reverently, his fingers tracing the engraved initials. "E.H. Emily Hamilton," he murmured. He opened the locket, revealing the familiar photo of Emily. But upon closer inspection, he noticed something he'd never seen before. "Wait a minute." Carefully, he removed the photo, revealing a tiny inscription hidden behind it. "To my daughter, my greatest treasure, may this locket always protect you. With love, Emily." Edward read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. Amelia sobbed, tears streaming down her face. She loved me. She didn't abandon me." Mrs. Davis embraced the girl, comforting her. "Of course she loved you, dear. Emily would never abandon her baby willingly." Edward nodded, a growing determination in his eyes. "This confirms our suspicions. Something happened to Emily, and we're going to find out what." That afternoon, Edward made a call. "Jean-Pierre, it's Edward Hamilton. I need your services again." Jean-Pierre Dubois, a renowned private investigator, arrived at Hamilton Manor the following day. Edward met him in the office, explaining the situation. "So, you believe your niece, whom you didn't know existed, appeared out of thin air after 10 years? Jean-Pierre asked skeptically. "I know how it sounds," Edward admitted. "But the locket, the resemblance, it's undeniable. I need you to investigate Emily's disappearance, and also the orphanage where Amelia was." Jean-Pierre nodded, taking notes. "I'll need access to all records from that time, and I'll also need to speak with the girl." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Amelia was helping Mrs. Davis prepare lunch. The housekeeper noticed how much more relaxed the girl seemed, smiling as she mixed the cookie dough. "You know, Amelia," Mrs. Davis began casually, "your mother loved to bake with me when she was young." Amelia's eyes lit up. "Really? What else did she like to do?" Mrs. Davis smiled, happy to see the girl opening up. "So, she loved making apple pies. She said the smell reminded her of the picnics we used to have in the summer." Amelia absorbed every word, hungry for any information about her mother. "Mrs. Davis, do you think we'll find out what happened to her?" The housekeeper hesitated, then answered honestly, "I don't know, dear, but I promise we'll do everything we can." In the days that followed, Jean-Pierre immersed himself in the investigation. He combed through archives, made calls, and followed leads. A week later, he returned to the mansion with disturbing news. "The orphanage documents," he said, spreading papers across Edward's desk, "are forged." Edward and Mrs. Davis exchanged alarmed glances. "What do you mean?" Edward asked. Jean-Pierre pointed to several inconsistencies in the papers, dates that don't match, forged signatures, and the strangest thing, there's no official record of Amelia in any government system before the age of 6. It's as if she simply didn't exist before then. "My God," Mrs. Davis whispered. "What does this mean?" "It means," Jean-Pierre replied gravely, "that someone was very careful to hide this girl's origins, and I suspect it's related to Emily's disappearance." Edward stood up, pacing back and forth. But who would do this, and why? Before anyone could answer, the mansion's doorbell rang. Mrs. Davis went to answer it, returning moments later with a worried expression. "Mr. Hamilton, it's Mr. William Carter. He insists on speaking with you." Edward paled visibly. William Carter, his former business partner, was the last person he expected to see. "Jean-Pierre, Mrs. Davis, please stay here. I'll handle this." In the living room, William waited, a cold smile on his face. "Edward, my old friend. Long time no see." "What do you want, William?" Edward asked tensely. William circled the room, examining the photographs on the walls. "I've heard some interesting rumors, Edward, about a certain visitor you've recently received." Edward felt his heart race. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, don't play coy," William chuckled humorlessly. "A little girl appearing out of nowhere, with a remarkable resemblance to our dear Emily." "How did you—" "I have my sources," William interrupted. "The question is, what do you intend to do with this information?" Edward stepped forward, anger replacing fear. "If you know something about Emily's disappearance." William raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Calm down, Edward. I just came to warn you. Some stones are best left unturned. For the girl's sake, you understand." The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. Edward was about to respond when he heard a small noise. Turning, he saw Amelia standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. William followed Edward's gaze and smiled when he saw Amelia. "Ah, so this is the famous niece. Hello, dear. I'm an old family friend." Amelia recoiled, instinctively hiding behind Edward. "Uncle Edward?" she murmured, the word uncle slipping out naturally for the first time. Edward placed a protective hand on Amelia's shoulder. "William was just leaving," he said firmly. William nodded, still smiling. Of course. It was a pleasure, Amelia. I'm sure we'll see each other again soon." With that, he left, leaving a heavy silence behind. As soon as the door closed, Edward knelt before Amelia. "Are you all right?" The girl nodded, trembling slightly. "Who was he, Uncle Edward? Why did he look at me like that?" Edward exchanged a worried look with Mrs. Davis and Jean-Pierre, who had entered the room. He was an old business partner of mine and your mother's. But don't worry, he won't hurt you. I promise." That night, after Amelia had gone to bed, Edward gathered Mrs. Davis and Jean-Pierre in his office. "William's visit was no coincidence," he said gravely. "He knows something about Emily and Amelia." Jean-Pierre nodded. "I agree, and I suspect he's involved in the forgery of the orphanage documents." "What are we going to do now?" Mrs. Davis asked, worry evident in her voice. Edward looked at Emily's photo on his desk, then at Amelia's locket. "We'll continue investigating." But very carefully, Amelia's safety is our top priority. As the night wore on, Hamilton Manor kept its new secrets. In the guest room, Amelia slept restlessly, dreaming of a green-eyed woman calling her name. And in his office, Edward Hamilton made a silent promise to his lost sister. He would uncover the truth no matter the cost. Jean-Pierre Dubois rubbed his tired eyes, staring at the computer screen. 3 days of intense investigation had revealed a disturbing pattern. He picked up the phone, dialing quickly. "Mr. Hamilton, I need to see you immediately. I've discovered something." An hour later, Edward, Mrs. Davis, and Jean-Pierre were gathered in the mansion's office. "Illegal adoptions," Jean-Pierre began, spreading documents across the table. "A sophisticated scheme operating for at least a decade, and there are connections to the orphanage where Amelia was..." Edward paled. "You think Amelia?" Jean-Pierre nodded gravely. "It's possible she was part of this scheme, but there's more. I found suspicious transactions linked to your company, Mr. Hamilton, dating back to the time of Emily's disappearance." "Impossible," Edward protested. "I never..." "Not you," Jean-Pierre interrupted, "but your former partner, William Carter. His name appears several times." A heavy silence fell over the room. Mrs. Davis was the first to break it. "That explains his sudden interest in Amelia." Edward stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth. "We need to protect her. If William finds out we're investigating..." "I've already taken the liberty of increasing security at the mansion," Jean-Pierre informed him. "But we need to be cautious. William has powerful connections." As they discussed their next steps, the phone rang. Mrs. Davis answered, her expression changing to alarm. "Mr. Hamilton, it's William. He wants to speak with Amelia. He says he has information about Emily." Edward grabbed the phone, his voice tense. "William, what do you want?" "Just a friendly chat with your lovely niece." William's voice sounded falsely sweet. "I'm sure she'd like to know more about her mother." "Stay away from her," Edward growled. William laughed. "Oh, Edward, you've always been so protective, but you can't hide her forever. Remember, I have resources you can't even imagine." The line went dead, leaving Edward trembling with rage and fear. Jean-Pierre placed a hand on his shoulder. "This confirms our suspicions. William is definitely involved." Mrs. Davis, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "There's something you need to know. Something I've kept hidden for years out of fear." Edward and Jean-Pierre turned to her, surprised. "The night Emily disappeared," Mrs. Davis began, her voice trembling, "I saw her leaving the mansion. She looked scared, carrying a small bundle. I thought I heard a baby crying, but I wasn't sure. She saw me and said, 'Mrs. Davis, if anything happens to me, look in the secret place, protect my treasure.' I never understood what she meant, until now." Edward approached her, shocked. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" Tears streamed down Mrs. Davis's face. "I was afraid." The next morning, William came to the mansion. "He threatened me, said that if I spoke, people I loved would get hurt." "The secret place," Edward murmured. "Emily's hiding spot in the attic." Wasting no time, they raced upstairs to a small, dusty room. Edward removed a loose panel in the wall, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, there was a box. With trembling hands, he opened it. Letters. Dozens of them, all written by Emily. "My God," he whispered, beginning to read. The letters revealed a terrible secret. Emily had discovered irregularities in the company, a money laundering scheme linked to illegal adoptions. William was at the center of it all. "She uncovered everything," Edward said, his voice choked with emotion. "And when she threatened to expose him, William..." "Oh, Emily." Jean-Pierre examined the letters. "This is enough evidence to launch an official investigation, but we need to be careful. William is still powerful." As they discussed their next steps, they didn't notice a small figure standing at the attic door. Amelia had followed the sound of their voices, curious about what was happening. "Uncle Edward," her soft voice startled them. Edward quickly hid the letters. "Amelia, dear, what are you doing here?" The girl shyly entered the room. I heard you talking about my mother." The adults exchanged worried glances. Edward knelt before her. "Amelia, there are things we need to tell you. Things about your mother, about why you were separated from her. Amelia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I knew she hadn't abandoned me. That's why I came looking for her. What do you mean, dear? Mrs. Davis asked gently. Amelia pulled a small folded piece of paper from her pocket. I found this hidden in the lining of the locket. It's an address. The address of this mansion. Edward took the paper, immediately recognizing Emily's handwriting. She left a clue for you, he murmured, awestruck. I ran away from the orphanage as soon as I found it, Amelia confessed. I spent months trying to get here, watching the mansion, gathering the courage to approach. Jean-Pierre stepped forward. Amelia, what do you remember about the orphanage? About how you got there? The girl frowned, concentrating. Not much. I remember a woman taking me there. She was crying, and there was a man, a scary man. William, Edward and Mrs. Davis said in unison. Jean-Pierre asked a few more questions, carefully noting Amelia's answers. Each word from the girl was a piece of the puzzle they were assembling. When they were finished, Edward hugged Amelia tightly. You were very brave, dear, and I promise we'll uncover the whole truth about your mother. That night, after putting Amelia to bed, Edward, Mrs. Davis and Jean-Pierre gathered again in the office. We have enough evidence to take to the authorities, Jean-Pierre said, but we need to act quickly. William will surely try to preempt us. Edward nodded, a fierce determination in his eyes. Tomorrow morning, we go to the police. It's time for William to pay for everything he's done. As they prepared for the battle ahead, none of them noticed the shadow moving outside the mansion. William Carter watched the house, a cold smile playing on his lips. He picked up his phone. It's time, he said to someone on the other end of the line. Bring the girl, and make sure Edward Hamilton doesn't interfere. The night deepened, and with it the promise of even greater dangers. Inside the mansion, Amelia slept, dreaming of the mother she never knew. And in his office, Edward Bennett prepared for the fight of his life, determined to protect his newfound niece and honor the memory of his lost sister. Morning arrived with a palpable tension hanging over Hamilton Manor. Edward, Mrs. Davis and Jean-Pierre were gathered in the office, reviewing the evidence one last time before going to the police. Amelia, oblivious to the turmoil, was having breakfast in the kitchen. Before we go, Jean-Pierre began, there's one more thing I discovered. He pulled a file from his briefcase. Emily's medical records, dated a few weeks before her disappearance. Edward took the documents, his eyes quickly scanning the pages. Suddenly, he stopped, paling visibly. This can't be true. Mrs. Davis approached, concerned. What is it, Mr. Hamilton? Emily was pregnant, Edward whispered, shocked. Almost 6 months along when she disappeared. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mrs. Davis covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, Emily, she murmured. Why didn't you tell us? Jean-Pierre cleared his throat, breaking the moment. This explains a lot. Emily's pregnancy was probably the catalyst for everything that happened afterward. Edward nodded slowly, the pieces clicking into place in his mind. William must have found out, and what if he was behind the illegal adoption scheme? Exactly, Jean-Pierre confirmed. My theory is that William saw an opportunity. A Hamilton child, with no one knowing of her existence, would be perfect for the scheme. Mrs. Davis, who had been silent, suddenly stood up. There's something you need to see. She hurried out, returning moments later with a dusty box. Emily gave me this to keep shortly before, well, you know. Inside the box was a diary and several photos. Edward opened the diary with trembling hands, immediately recognizing his sister's handwriting. On March 3rd, he read aloud. I discovered something terrible today. William is involved in an illegal adoption scheme, children being sold overseas. I can't stay silent, but I'm afraid. Not just for myself, but for my baby. Mrs. Davis sobbed softly. She was so scared in her last days. Now I understand why. Jean-Pierre examined the photos. Look at this, he said, pointing to a picture of a visibly pregnant Emily, embracing Elizabeth, Edward's deceased wife. Edward took the photo, his expression a mixture of pain and surprise. Elizabeth knew, he murmured. She was helping Emily. That explains why Elizabeth was so distraught in the months following Emily's disappearance, Mrs. Davis said, memories flooding back. She must have carried this secret for years. As they examined more photos and diary entries, the truth about Emily's last months began to unfold. Her discovery of the scheme, William's threats, the growing fear for the safety of her unborn child. Emily was planning to run away, Edward said, reading one of the last entries. She was going to expose William, but she feared for her baby's life. Elizabeth was helping her prepare everything. Jean-Pierre nodded gravely. And it's likely that William discovered the plan. That would explain Emily's sudden disappearance and, years later, Elizabeth's accident. The realization of how deep the conspiracy ran hit them all like a punch to the gut. Edward stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth. We need concrete proof, something that directly links William to all of this. The DNA test, Jean-Pierre suggested. If we confirm that Amelia is indeed Emily's daughter, we'll have a solid foundation to launch a wider investigation. Edward agreed. Make it happen. The sooner we have that confirmation, the better. While Jean-Pierre made the necessary calls to expedite the DNA test, Mrs. Davis decided to share more memories of Emily with Edward. Remember that summer when Emily was 16? Mrs. Davis began, a nostalgic smile on her face. She spent weeks planning that camping trip. Edward chuckled softly, the memory warming his heart. Yes, and she came back covered in scratches after falling trying to climb a tree to get the perfect shot. Mrs. Davis nodded. She was always determined, stubborn even, but with such a big heart. Her voice cracked. She would have been a wonderful mother. The moment was interrupted by a cry from the hallway. Edward and Mrs. Davis rushed out, finding Amelia standing before a painting, tears streaming down her face. Amelia, what's wrong? Edward asked, concerned. The girl pointed at the painting, an enlarged photo of Elizabeth and Emily together. It's my mother, Amelia whispered. And who is this with her? Edward knelt beside Amelia. That's Elizabeth, my wife. She was very close to your mother. Amelia touched Emily's face in the photo. She looks so happy. And is she pregnant here? Edward exchanged a look with Mrs. Davis before answering. Yes, dear, that's you, still in her belly. Amelia's eyes widened. So she wanted me. She didn't abandon me. Never, Edward said firmly. Your mother loved you more than anything, and she did everything she could to protect you. At that moment, Jean-Pierre appeared in the hallway. Everything's ready. We can do the DNA test right now. Hours later, the group was gathered back in the office, anxiously awaiting the results. When the email finally arrived, Edward opened it with trembling hands. Positive, he announced, his voice thick with emotion. 99.9% certainty. Amelia is Emily's daughter. The room erupted in a mixture of emotions. Amelia wept openly, embraced by Mrs. Davis. Edward sat down heavily, the reality of everything hitting him with full force. What now? Mrs. Davis asked, after everyone had calmed down. Jean-Pierre stepped forward. Now we have what we need to go to the police. With the DNA test, Emily's letters, and all the evidence we've gathered about the adoption scheme, we can finally expose William and the whole operation. Edward nodded, a fierce determination in his eyes. Tomorrow morning, we'll end this once and for all. For Emily, for Amelia, and for all the other children who may have been victims of this terrible scheme. As night fell upon Hamilton Manor, a sense of hope and apprehension hung in the air. Amelia, now officially a Hamilton, slept clutching her mother's locket. Edward, in his office, gazed at the photos of Emily and Elizabeth, silently vowing to bring justice. Outside, hidden in the shadows, William watched the mansion, unaware that his empire was about to crumble. The final confrontation was approaching, and the long-buried truths would finally come to light. Dawn barely broke when the doorbell at Hamilton Manor rang. Mrs. Davis, already up preparing breakfast, went to answer it. Her face paled when she saw William Carter standing on the doorstep, a cold smile on his lips. "Good morning, Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "May we have a private word?" Reluctantly, knowing she couldn't simply shut the door in his face, Mrs. Davis led him into the kitchen. "Mr. Hamilton isn't awake yet," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. William waved a dismissive hand. "It's not Richard I want to speak with. It's you, my dear." He pulled a thick envelope from his inside jacket pocket and placed it on the kitchen table. "Inside this envelope is $500,000, he said, watching Mrs. Davis's reaction carefully. "It can be yours if you do one simple thing for me." Mrs. Davis looked at the envelope, then back at William. "What do you want?" "Information," he replied, leaning forward, "about the girl, about what Edward has discovered, and most importantly, about any documents Emily might have left behind." For a moment, Mrs. Davis felt the weight of temptation. $500,000 could change her life. But then she remembered Emily's face, Amelia's smile, the trust Edward placed in her. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she said, pushing the envelope back towards him, "but my loyalty isn't for sale." William's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Think carefully, Mrs. Davis. This may be your only chance to get out of this situation unscathed." The veiled threat did not go unnoticed, but before Mrs. Davis could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Edward entered the kitchen, stopping abruptly when he saw William. "What are you doing here?" Edward demanded, placing himself protectively beside Mrs. Davis. William stood up calmly, adjusting his jacket. "Just a friendly visit, Edward. Mrs. Davis and I were having a fascinating conversation about loyalty." With a final meaningful look at Mrs. Davis, William left, leaving a tense silence behind. "He tried to bribe me," Mrs. Davis confessed as soon as they heard the front door close. $500,000 for information about Amelia and Emily's documents. Edward clenched his fists, anger evident in his face. "That bastard! He's getting desperate." At that moment, Jean-Pierre hurried into the kitchen, holding a file. "Excuse the interruption, but I've discovered something crucial about Elizabeth's accident." Edward and Mrs. Davis turned to him, attentive. "The official reports indicated mechanical failure," Jean-Pierre continued, "but I found evidence of tampering. The brakes were sabotaged." Edward staggered, gripping the table for support. "My God, William, he killed Elizabeth, and probably tried to do the same to Emily," Jean-Pierre added grimly. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Edward, recovering from the initial shock, headed resolutely to his office, Mrs. Davis and Jean-Pierre on his heels. "If William is willing to go this far," Edward said, rummaging through a locked drawer in his desk, "then it's time we used all our weapons." He pulled out a thick folder, filled with documents. "Now these are financial records from the company, from the time when William was a partner. I kept them hidden, suspecting they might be useful one day." Jean-Pierre examined the papers, his eyes widening. This is incredible. We have clear evidence here of money laundering, bribery, and..." He paused, shocked. "A list of adopted children, with amounts next to each name." Mrs. Davis stifled a sob. All those children is sold like commodities. As they discussed the implications of these new discoveries, a sharp cry echoed through the mansion. "Amelia!" Edward exclaimed, running towards the girls' room. They found Amelia sitting on the bed, trembling and crying. Edward immediately embraced her. "Shh! It's all right. It was just a nightmare." But Amelia shook her head frantically. "It wasn't just a dream. I remembered." "Remembered what, dear?" Mrs. Davis asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "The bad man," Amelia whispered. He was yelling at my mother. She was crying, holding me. And then he pushed her. She fell and The girl sobbed, unable to continue. Edward exchanged alarmed glances with Jean-Pierre and Mrs. Davis. These memories could be the key to unraveling what really happened to Emily. "Amelia," Jean-Pierre said gently, "do you remember anything else? Any detail could be important." The girl frowned, concentrating. There was a big house. Not this one. There was a lake nearby, and the bad man, he had a shiny ring on his finger. Edward nodded slowly. "William's country house. That's where it must have happened." While Jean-Pierre made frantic notes, Mrs. Davis had a sudden idea. "The documents," she murmured. "We need to protect them." She hurried out, returning moments later with a metal box. "I put everything in here," she explained. "Emily's letters, the financial records, everything. I'll hide it in the secret place in the attic." Edward agreed. "Good idea. William can't get his hands on this." While Mrs. Davis went to hide the documents, Edward turned to Amelia. "You were very brave to tell us this, dear. I promise we'll get justice for you and your mother." Jean-Pierre, finishing his notes, and stood up. "With this new information, we can finally build a solid case against William. I'll contact my contacts at the police immediately." As the day wore on, the tension in Hamilton Manor was palpable. Edward alternated between comforting Amelia and working with Jean-Pierre on the preparations to expose William. Mrs. Davis reinforced the security of the house, fearing that William might attempt something desperate. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, Edward looked out the window of his office. He knew they were approaching the climax of this long and painful saga. The conspiracies were being unraveled, the truths revealed. "Emily," he whispered to himself, "we're almost there. We'll get justice for you and Amelia." Outside, hidden in the shadows of the bushes, a man watched the mansion with binoculars. He picked up a phone. "Boss, they're making moves." "What do we do now?" William's voice sounded cold and determined from the other end of the line. "Get ready. Tonight, we end this once and for all." Night fell upon Hamilton Manor, bringing with it the promise of an imminent confrontation. The pieces were in place, the secrets revealed. The final chapter of this conspiracy was about to be written, and no one knew for sure how it would end. Night fell upon Hamilton Manor, bringing with it a deceptive quiet. Amelia, still shaken by her newfound memories, had finally fallen asleep. Edward, unable to rest, wandered the halls of the house, his mind racing with unanswered questions. His steps led him to Elizabeth's old room. Hesitantly, he turned the knob, entering the room that had remained virtually untouched since his wife's death. Her perfume still lingered in the air, a sweet reminder of happier times. Edward approached the closet, his fingers tracing the outlines of the hanging dresses. It was then that he noticed something, a winter coat he didn't remember Elizabeth ever wearing. Curious, he picked it up, feeling something strange in the lining. Carefully, Edward examined the coat, discovering a poorly stitched seam in the lining. Guided by a hunch, he unpicked it, revealing a hidden envelope. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope, immediately recognizing Elizabeth's handwriting. The letter was dated a week before the fatal accident. "My dearest Edward," he began to read aloud, his voice choked with emotion. "If you are reading this, something terrible has happened. There are secrets I have kept for too long, out of fear and love. But I can no longer remain silent. Emily is alive, Edward, or at least she was when I last saw her. William is keeping her hidden, using her and the child as leverage to ensure our silence. I discovered his illegal adoption scheme years ago, but he threatened to kill Emily if I said anything. I have been helping Emily in secret, bringing her supplies and information. She is determined to escape and expose William, but it's dangerous. The child, Amelia, is the key to everything. William knows she is the rightful heir to part of the company, and he fears that one day she might claim her rights. I plan to help Emily escape this week. If anything goes wrong, you will find all the evidence we have gathered in our special place. You know where. Forgive me for keeping this secret for so long. I love you more than anything, and I only hope that one day you can understand why I did what I did. With all my love, Elizabeth." Edward dropped the letter, his legs giving way. He sat down on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down his face. Everything made sense now. Elizabeth's strange behavior in recent months, her mysterious trips, the whispered phone calls. "Oh, Elizabeth," he sobbed, "you carried this burden alone for all this time." Suddenly, a noise from downstairs alerted him. Edward quickly stood up, putting the letter in his pocket. As he left the room, he almost collided with Mrs. Davis, who was running down the hallway. "Mr. Hamilton," she gasped. "William, he's here, with armed men." Edward's blood ran cold. "Amelia." Jean-Pierre took her to the hiding place in the attic, Mrs. Davis replied quickly. They barely had time to process the information when they heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. William appeared in the hallway, flanked by two menacing-looking men. "Edward, my old friend?" William smiled, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "What a touching reunion we're having." "What do you want, William?" Edward asked, positioning himself protectively in front of Mrs. Davis. William laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "What I've always wanted, Edward. Control power, and that little bastard you're hiding is the key to all of it." "You'll never touch Amelia," Edward growled. "Oh, but I will," William retorted, his smile disappearing. "Just like I touched Emily. Just like, well, you know what happened to dear Elizabeth." The mention of Elizabeth made something snap inside Edward. "You," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a punch. "You caused her accident." William clapped sarcastically. "Bravo, Edward. You finally put the pieces together. Yes, I arranged Elizabeth's little incident. She was getting dangerously close to revealing everything, just like Emily was about to do before her unfortunate disappearance." Mrs. Davis stifled a sob, horrified by the revelations. Edward, on the other hand, felt a growing rage. "You'll pay for all of this, William," he said, his voice trembling with anger. William just smiled, pulling out a gun. "I think not, Edward. You see, with you and the girl out of the way, there will be no one to challenge my control over the company. It will be a tragedy, of course. Poor Edward Hamilton, driven mad by the loss of his wife and sister, committing a terrible act before taking his own life." Time seemed to freeze. Edward saw William's finger tighten on the trigger, heard Mrs. Davis scream. But before the shot could be fired, a commotion erupted downstairs. "Police!" "Freeze!" William's face contorted in shock and fury. He turned, ready to flee, but it was too late. Armed officers were coming up the stairs, led by Jean-Pierre. "William Carter," one of the officers announced, "you are under arrest for the murder of Elizabeth Hamilton, the kidnapping of Emily Hamilton, and involvement in an illegal adoption scheme." As William was disarmed and handcuffed, Edward leaned against the wall, the adrenaline draining from his body. Mrs. Davis embraced him, both of them trembling with the weight of the events. Jean-Pierre approached, Amelia safe by his side. "We did it, Edward," he said softly. "The evidence we gathered, along with William's involuntary confession just now, is more than enough." Edward knelt down, hugging Amelia tightly. "It's all right now, dear. Everything's all right." As William was led away, shouting threats and accusations, Edward pulled Elizabeth's letter from his pocket, handing it to Jean-Pierre. "There's one more piece of the puzzle," he said. "Elizabeth. She knew everything. She was trying to save Emily." Jean-Pierre quickly read the letter, his eyes widening. "This changes everything," he murmured. "Edward, this means that Emily might be alive," Edward finished, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Amelia looked up, her eyes shining with tears and hope. "Can we find my mother?" Edward hugged her again, feeling, for the first time in years, a true sense of purpose. "Yes, dear, we'll find her. Together." As the night wore on, Hamilton Manor, once a place of secrets and sorrow, now filled with a new energy. The truth had been revealed, justice was being served, and a new journey was about to begin. The search for Emily Hamilton had officially begun, and with it, the promise of healing and redemption for everyone involved. The sun had barely risen when Edward, Amelia, Jean-Pierre, and Mrs. Davis arrived at police headquarters. William Carter, handcuffed and haggard, was already in the interrogation room. The lead detective, a middle-aged man named Marcus Thompson, greeted the group with a grave nod. "Mr. Hamilton," Thompson said, "we're ready to begin." "Are you sure you want to be present?" Edward nodded firmly. "I need to look him in the eye and hear the truth." Thompson hesitated, glancing at Amelia. "And the girl?" "She stays with me," Edward replied, holding Amelia's hand. "So she deserves to know the truth as much as I do." With a resigned sigh, Thompson led them to an adjacent room, separated from the interrogation room by a one-way mirror. William couldn't see them, but they had a clear view of him. The interrogation began. William initially maintained his arrogant demeanor, denying all accusations. But as Thompson presented evidence after evidence, his facade began to crumble. "We know about the sabotage of Elizabeth Hamilton's car," Thompson declared, throwing photos of the accident scene on the table. "The marks on the brakes are unmistakable." William paled visibly. That doesn't prove anything. "Doesn't it?" Thompson raised an eyebrow. "And how about this?" He placed Elizabeth's letter found in the coat on the table. William's eyes widened in recognition. His gaze darted between the letter and the detective, panic evident in his face. How did you get that?" he stammered. On the other side of the glass, Edward squeezed Amelia's hand. The girl stared intently at William, her green eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. Thompson continued to press, presenting more and more evidence, financial records, testimonies from orphanage employees, even audio recordings that Jean-Pierre had managed to collect secretly. Finally, after hours of interrogation, William broke. "All right," he shouted, slamming his fists on the table. "Yes, I did it. All those idiotic accusations, I did it all." The confession came pouring out. William revealed how he had discovered Emily's pregnancy and seen an opportunity to expand his illegal adoption scheme. When Emily threatened to expose him, he kidnapped her, keeping her hidden for years. "Sir Elizabeth found out," he continued, his voice now a hoarse whisper. "She was helping Emily in secret, planning to free her. I had no choice. I had to silence her." Edward felt his legs weaken. Mrs. Davis supported him, silent tears streaming down her face. "And Emily?" Thompson asked. "Where is she now?" William laughed bitterly. "Dead, probably. She escaped a few years ago. I never found her." A heavy silence fell over the room. Amelia sobbed softly, burying her face in Edward's chest. When the interrogation ended, Thompson joined them in the observation room. "We have enough to put him away for several lifetimes," he informed them. "But we still need to find Emily, dead or alive. We need answers." Edward nodded, exhausted. "What can we do now?" It was then that Amelia spoke, her voice small but determined. "The diary," she said. "Aunt Elizabeth's coded diary. Maybe it has clues." Everyone turned to her, surprised. Jean-Pierre was the first to recover. "Of course." Elizabeth mentioned in her letter that she had hidden information in the special place. It must be the diary. Hours later, back at Hamilton Manor, the group gathered in the office. Elizabeth's diary lay open on the table, its pages filled with seemingly meaningless symbols and numbers. "It's some kind of code," Jean-Pierre murmured, frowning. "But I can't decipher it." Amelia timidly approached, her eyes scanning the pages. "Can I try?" she asked. Edward hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, dear. Any help is welcome." To everyone's surprise, Amelia began working on the code with surprising ease. Her fingers flew across the pages, making notes connecting patterns that the adults couldn't see. "It's a date-based code," she explained, her voice animated for the first time in days. "Look, each symbol corresponds to an important event in Aunt Elizabeth and Mom's lives." With Amelia's guidance, they began to decipher the diary. The revelations were shocking. Elizabeth had meticulously documented William's every move, every suspicious transaction, every child adopted through his scheme. "My God," Mrs. Davis whispered, reading a deciphered passage. "William's empire. It's much bigger than we imagined. Politicians, judges, even international agents, all involved." Jean-Pierre made frantic calls, passing the information on to the authorities. Every hour, news of new arrests arrived. William's criminal empire was rapidly crumbling. But it was on the last page of the diary that they found the most precious information. "It's a map," Amelia exclaimed, her eyes shining. "A map to where Mom was hiding." Edward carefully examined the map. "I know this place," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "It's an old family property, hours from here. Elizabeth must have prepared it as a refuge for Emily." Wasting no time, Edward, Jean-Pierre and Amelia set off, leaving Mrs. Davis to coordinate with the police. The journey seemed endless, each minute fraught with anticipation and fear. When they finally arrived at the property, the sun was setting. The house, A modest structure surrounded by trees looked as if it had been abandoned for years. Hearts pounding, they approached. Edward knocked on the door, calling Emily's name. Silence. They were about to break down the door when they heard a noise coming from the back of the house. Rushing around, they stopped abruptly. A woman stood in the small garden, a shovel lying at her feet. Her hair, once blonde, was now streaked with grey. Her face, and though marked by time and suffering, was unmistakable. "Emily," Edward whispered, barely daring to believe it. The woman slowly turned, her green eyes, the same eyes as Amelia's, widening in recognition and shock. "Edward," she gasped. Then her gaze fell upon Amelia, and tears began to stream down her face. "My girl, my Amelia." With a cry of joy and pain, Amelia ran into her mother's arms. Emily held her tightly, sobbing and murmuring words of love and apology. Edward watched the scene, his own tears flowing freely. After all these years, after so much pain and loss, his family was finally reunited. In the days that followed, justice continued its course. William and his accomplices were tried and convicted. The illegal adoption scheme was completely dismantled, and efforts were made to reunite the separated families. Emily, though traumatized by her years of captivity and subsequent isolation, slowly began to heal, surrounded by the love of her daughter, her brother, and the faithful Mrs. Davis. And Amelia, the girl who once wandered the streets alone, now had not only a mother but a whole family and a home. As he watched Amelia and Emily planting flowers in the garden of Hamilton Manor, Edward reflected on the high price of silence and the liberating power of truth. The past could not be changed, but the future, bright and full of hope, was just beginning. Hamilton Manor, once a monument to loneliness and secrets, now glowed with the warm light of Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the events that had forever changed the lives of all its inhabitants. The scent of fresh pine mingled with the tempting smell of freshly baked cookies, while the sound of laughter and animated conversation filled every room. Edward Hamilton stood at the foot of the stairs, watching the scene before him with a mixture of joy and disbelief. Who would have thought, just a year ago, that his home and his life could be transformed so dramatically? "Uncle Edward!" Amelia's cheerful voice broke through his thoughts. The 12-year-old girl ran down the stairs, her brown curls bouncing with each step. "Come see. Mom and I finished decorating Aunt Elizabeth's room." Edward smiled, and allowing himself to be pulled along by his niece. The room that had once belonged to his deceased wife and which had remained closed for so long had now been transformed into a welcoming and vibrant space. Emily, Edward's sister and Amelia's mother, stood by the window, adjusting a garland. Seeing her brother enter, she smiled, her green eyes, so much like her daughter's, shining with a mixture of emotion and peace. "What do you think?" Emily asked, gesturing around the room. Edward looked around, marveling. The walls, once a somber hue, were now painted a soft sky blue. Photographs of Elizabeth and Emily together adorned the walls, interspersed with drawings made by Amelia. In the center of the room, a small Christmas tree shimmered with delicate ornaments, many of them clearly handmade. "It's perfect," Edward managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Elizabeth would have loved it." Amelia approached, holding something in her hands. "Look, Uncle Edward, we found this among Aunt Elizabeth's things." It was an old diary, bound in faded red leather. Edward took it carefully, immediately recognizing his wife's handwriting on the first page. "To my dearest Emily," he read aloud, "may this diary hold your most precious memories, just as you held my deepest secrets. With all my love, Elizabeth." Emily stepped closer, touching the diary gently. "She gave me this the last Christmas we spent together," she explained. "But with everything that happened afterward, I never had the chance to use it." "Until now," Amelia added, smiling. At that moment, Mrs. Davis appeared at the door, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen. "Yes, dinner's almost ready," she announced, "and we have visitors arriving." Descending the stairs, the family was greeted by the sight of Jean-Pierre Dubois, the detective who had been instrumental in unraveling the entire conspiracy, accompanied by Marcus Thompson. the lead detective who had headed the case. "Merry Christmas, Hamilton family," Jean-Pierre greeted, his eyes twinkling as he saw the transformation of the once gloomy mansion. After warm greetings, everyone headed to the dining room, where a festive table awaited them. Mrs. Davis had outdone herself. A golden, succulent turkey was the centerpiece, surrounded by a variety of mouth-watering side dishes. As they sat down, Edward raised his glass. "Before we begin," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I would like to propose a toast to Elizabeth and Emily, two sisters whose love and courage inspire us every day." "To Elizabeth and Emily," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Dinner proceeded in an atmosphere of joy and gratitude. Between bites, stories were shared, some eliciting laughter, others bringing tears to their eyes. "Remember," Mrs. Davis began, her eyes twinkling with remembrance, "the Christmas when Elizabeth and Emily decided to create a treasure hunt throughout the mansion for all the presents." Edward laughed. "How could I forget? We spent hours searching, only to discover they had hidden everything in the attic and forgotten to distribute the clues." Laughter echoed around the table, and even Marcus and Jean-Pierre, who didn't know the story, joined in the merriment. After dessert, an apple pie that Amelia had helped make, following an old recipe of Elizabeth's, everyone gathered in the living room. The large pine tree in the corner shimmered with lights and ornaments, many of them carrying special memories. "I have an announcement to make," Edward said, capturing everyone's attention. He paused, smiling at Amelia before continuing. "The paperwork was finalized this morning. Amelia is officially, legally, and irrevocably a Hamilton." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. Amelia, with tears in her eyes, hugged Edward first, then Emily, and finally Mrs. Davis, who had long occupied the place of a grandmother in her heart. "And there's more," Edward continued when the commotion subsided. "As you know, over the past year, we established two foundations in honor of Elizabeth and Emily. I am proud to announce that, together, they have already helped more than 500 families affected by illegal adoptions and at-risk situations." Emily, visibly moved, added, "And starting next year, we will be expanding our work internationally. We want to ensure that what happened to us never happens to another family again." Jean-Pierre stepped forward. "On behalf of the police department, I would like to express our gratitude for the work you are doing. The Hamilton case not only dismantled a criminal network, but also opened the eyes of the authorities to a much larger problem." Marcus nodded, adding, "Your work is making a difference. We are seeing changes in policies and laws, all thanks to what you started." As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed freely, punctuated by moments of reflection and gratitude. In a quiet moment, Amelia approached Emily, holding something in her hands. "Mom," she said softly, "I wanted to give you this." She held out the locket that had for so long been her only link to the past. Emily took the locket with trembling hands, opening it to reveal the old photo. But to her surprise, there was something more. Amelia had added a new photo to the other side of the locket, a recent picture of the whole family together. "Now it tells our whole story," Amelia explained, "the past and the present." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Emily hugged her daughter tightly, the locket pressed between them, a tangible symbol of their unbreakable bond. When the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, everyone headed out to the garden. There, bathed in the soft moonlight and Christmas lights, was the memorial they had erected for Elizabeth and Emily. A beautiful marble fountain, with statues of the two women holding hands, symbolized their eternal connection. Edward pressed a button, and hundreds of tiny lights illuminated the fountain, creating a magical spectacle in the freshly fallen snow. At the base of the statue, a bronze plaque gleamed. "In loving memory of Elizabeth and Emily Hamilton, sisters by blood and by heart, whose love and courage light our way." As everyone watched in reverent silence, snowflakes began to fall softly, as if heaven itself were blessing the moment. "You know," Emily said softly, her voice filled with emotion, "there were times during all those years in hiding when I thought about giving up. But it was the memory of Elizabeth, her strength and her love, that kept me going." Edward put an arm around his sister's shoulders. "And it was your love for Amelia that brought you back to us." Amelia, standing between her mother and her uncle, held both their hands. "And now we're all together," she said, her voice full of certainty and gratitude. Mrs. Davis joined them, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Elizabeth would be so proud," she said softly. "Of all of you." As the snow continued to fall gently, the Hamilton family, now complete and healed, stood united before the memorial. The past, with all its pain and secrets, had finally been laid to rest. The future, bright and full of promise, stretched before them. Edward raised his glass one last time. "To family," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "To the sisters who showed us the true meaning of love and sacrifice. To the truth that, though painful, set us free. And to the future we will build together, honoring the legacy of Emily and Elizabeth." "To family," everyone echoed, their voices uniting in a silent promise of love, loyalty, and hope. As they walked back to the warmth of the house, leaving footprints in the fresh snow, each member of the Hamilton family carried with them the certainty that, no matter how dark the night may seem, love has the power to light the way back home. The legacy of Emily and Elizabeth, born of love, forged in adversity and triumphing over darkness, would continue to shine for generations to come, a beacon of hope for all who crossed their path.